Imagine a lone bounty hunter navigating a world consumed by war, where every shadow hides unimaginable horrors. Hive cities filled with ruthless chaos space marines, alien predators lurking in the smoke, and entire armies ready to annihilate anything in their path. But he isn't alone. A mysterious child with unimaginable powers is by his side. Can the Mandalorian survive the relentless nightmare of Warhammer 40K? Or will this galaxy finally claim its most cunning hunter?
The Mandalorian's ship shuddered violently as it tore through the atmosphere of the Hive world, metal screaming against metal, the sky a churning maelstrom of ash and acidic rain. He gripped the controls with an iron resolve, feeling the familiar hum of his armor against his chest, yet knowing that nothing in his past missions could have prepared him for the landscape unfolding beneath him. The sprawling cityscape was a twisted labyrinth of Gothic spires and industrial towers belching smoke and fire into the blood-red sky. The ground below was a patchwork of craters, scorched earth, and crumbling infrastructure, a testament to centuries of unending war. He maneuvered through the thick haze, dodging falling debris and arcs of lightning that danced between jagged spires, trying desperately to find a safe landing. His instincts screamed at him to remain calm, but even he could feel the weight of unfamiliar danger pressing in from every direction. The moment he touched down, the air was thick with the stench of burning oil and decayed metal. The Mandalorian's visor scanned the immediate vicinity, revealing movement that triggered the old survival instincts honed over years of hunting bounties across countless systems. Figures emerged from the shadows, hulking, green-skinned silhouettes with crude armor and jagged weapons, their eyes gleaming with bloodlust. Orcs. The sheer size and sheer savagery of the creatures made even his seasoned reflexes tighten, and he quickly realized that stealth was no longer an option. He drew his blaster, the familiar hum of energy charging in his gauntlet, providing a small measure of reassurance. Each orc seemed to move with chaotic synchronization, yet there was a terrifying intelligence in their feral glares, a primitive cunning that had allowed their kind to survive for millennia. The Mandalorian's feet hit the scorched ground as he leapt from his ship, rolling to absorb the impact and immediately diving behind the remnants of a crumbling wall. Orc chittering and guttural laughter echoed off the nearby towers, reverberating through the ruined streets like the beating of war drums. He knew that one mistake could be fatal. Drawing a thermal charge from his belt, he lobbed it toward an advancing orc mob, the explosion tearing through the nearest attackers with a burst of flame and debris. The shockwave rattled his helmet, and for a fleeting moment he allowed himself a glimmer of satisfaction. Survival depended on quick thinking and ruthless precision, and he had both in abundance. Even as he moved through the labyrinthian alleyways, the Mandalorian could feel the oppressive weight of Hive City pressing down on him. Gigantic pipes spewed corrosive smoke, conveyor systems creaked under the strain of industrial rot, and the constant echo of distant artillery fire reminded him that this planet had been a battlefield for longer than he could fathom. Every shadow seemed to hide a new threat, every crumbling ledge a potential trap. He adjusted his jetpack, briefly hovering above a broken thoroughfare to survey the landscape. Beyond the immediate swarm of orcs, he could see enormous rusted tanks and bipedal walkers scuttling across the terrain, their operators oblivious to his presence, yet fully aware of the omnipresent chaos that defined their world. Suddenly, a massive orc warboss emerged, towering above the rest, its crude armor adorned with spikes and trophies of previous conquests. The beast let out a guttural roar that vibrated through the Mandalorian's chestplate, shaking loose dust in his helmet. The creature's gaze locked onto him instantly, and he felt the unmistakable thrill of the hunt reversed. Now he was the prey. He fired his blaster, the shot searing through the humid, polluted air, striking the warboss squarely in the chest. Yet it barely slowed the creature. Its laughter was deafening, a sound that carried centuries of unbridled aggression. He realized that conventional tactics would not be enough to survive this encounter. Quick on his feet, he activated his flamethrower, the roaring inferno forcing the nearest orcs to scatter, buying him precious seconds to maneuver. As he retreated deeper into the twisting industrial ruins, the Mandalorian's mind raced. He had entered this world with no knowledge of its factions, its rules, or the sheer scale of violence that permeated every inch of its surface. Yet instinctively, he adapted, weaving through corridors and tunnels, utilizing every shadow, every alcove, every scrap of cover to stay ahead of his relentless pursuers. The sounds of the hive, the grinding machinery, the guttural shouts, the metallic groans of collapsing structures became a perverse symphony guiding his movement. He was alone, yet he felt a strange sense of purpose. Survival here was not just about escaping the orcs. It was about understanding this brutal, unyielding world enough to navigate it. Finally, he reached the edge of an abandoned industrial plaza, the ground littered with remnants of ancient battles, broken weapons, shattered armor, and the skeletal remains of unknown warriors. He paused, scanning the horizon. The Hive city stretched endlessly, a chaotic sprawl of towers and factories interwoven with chasms and scorched battlefields. Smoke rose in thick columns, and distant flashes of fire hinted at conflicts even more savage than the one he had just survived. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to find shelter, to prepare for the next wave, because in this world, danger was not just imminent, it was eternal. And as the Mandalorian adjusted his jetpack and readied his weapons, he knew that the fight for survival on this Hive world was only just beginning. The Mandalorian's armor bore the scars of the landing, streaked with grime and blood, yet his resolve remained unbroken. He crouched behind a pile of rubble, breathing steadily, eyes scanning the encroaching shadows. The orcs were regrouping, their crude war cries echoing through the labyrinthine streets, each sound a promise of chaos and destruction. He calculated every possible escape route, every tactical advantage, knowing that in a place like this, hesitation could be fatal. And yet beneath the adrenaline and the constant threat of death, a quiet curiosity stirred within him. This world was unlike any he had ever encountered, a crucible of violence and power where survival demanded more than skill. It demanded cunning, adaptability, and a readiness to face the unimaginable.
The Mandalorian moved cautiously through the ruined streets, each step calculated, his boots crunching over shards of broken concrete and twisted metal. The Hive world stretched endlessly around him, a chaotic tangle of machinery, smoke, and towering spires, all scarred by centuries of unending war. Yet amid the devastation, something caught his eye, a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from a narrow alley partially obscured by debris. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, a soft hum resonating through the air. Instinctively, he knew it was something ancient, something beyond the crude technology and violence of the orcs that had chased him earlier. He adjusted his helmet, analyzing the source as he approached, each movement careful to avoid drawing attention. As he stepped closer, the glow resolved into a structure partially hidden beneath the ruins, a shrine unlike anything he had seen before. Gothic arches intertwined with complex, arcane machinery, wires snaking like veins across stone and metal alike. The walls were etched with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of his eye, and strange mechanical constructs moved silently along the edges, tending to devices he could not comprehend. He instinctively reached for his blaster, but paused. This was not a threat in the conventional sense. This was a place of worship and power, a fusion of faith and technology that spoke of devotion and obsession in equal measure. The Mandalorian's visor picked up the faint traces of energy that pulsed through the shrine, the kind of energy that made even seasoned warriors uneasy. He had faced dangerous artifacts before, things that bent the rules of physics and perception, but this felt different, alive, and aware of his presence. He moved carefully, stepping over the tangled remains of mechanical servitors, their skeletal frames creaking under the strain of centuries. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning metal, a reminder that even in reverence, this place was alive with power, dangerous in ways that could not be measured in bullets or blades. A sudden click echoed through the chamber as a panel slid open, revealing a darkened corridor beyond. The Mandalorian paused, considering the risk, yet curiosity pushed him forward. Every instinct screamed caution, but the possibility of understanding this world, of learning something vital that could aid his survival, was too compelling to ignore. He stepped into the corridor, the hum of machinery growing louder, wrapping around him like an invisible shroud. The walls were lined with conduits, etched with runes that glowed faintly under his visor's enhanced vision. The deeper he ventured, the more he felt the presence of the shrine, as if it were a living entity observing his every movement. Finally, he entered a chamber at the heart of the shrine. Towering machines loomed over him, intricate and impossibly complex, their purpose hidden beneath layers of arcane engineering. Servo arms moved with precise, almost ritualistic movements, adjusting components and releasing bursts of energy that flared across the room. At the center, a massive cogitator, its surface etched with runes and glyphs, pulsed with a steady light that seemed to synchronize with the Mandalorian's own heartbeat. He could feel the weight of history here, the countless lives dedicated to maintaining this fusion of faith and machine. This was not merely a place of worship, it was a sanctuary for knowledge, a fortress for secrets that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. The Mandalorian approached carefully, wary of triggering traps or alarms. Every step was measured, yet he could not resist the pull of curiosity. His hand brushed against one of the consoles, and a cascade of information flooded his visor. Schematics, battle data, and cryptic instructions in a language he could not fully decipher. Some of it seemed familiar, reminiscent of star charts and navigational data, yet the intricacies of the machinery suggested a level of technological sophistication far beyond the Mandalorian's experience. He realized that these were the devices of the Adeptus Mechanicus, followers of the machine god, obsessed with merging flesh and metal, worshipping technology as divine. He had encountered many cultures, many beliefs, but none so intensely focused, so single-minded in purpose. A faint hiss drew his attention upward, where servitors with glowing red eyes and mechanical limbs moved silently across the walls, monitoring his every action. He held his blaster ready, but did not fire. These constructs were not aggressive yet, more curious than hostile, and perhaps recognizing that he was no ordinary intruder. His presence alone was a disruption to the ritualistic harmony of the shrine, yet he sensed that patience and observation could allow him to navigate without provoking outright hostility. He scanned the room, noting patterns in the machinery's movements, learning to anticipate the flow of energy, the rhythm of mechanical life that pulsed through the chamber. As he explored further, the Mandalorian found relics embedded in the floor, items that radiated both historical significance and dangerous potential. Weapons of strange design, tools that defied understanding, and data slates that contained encrypted knowledge of wars spanning centuries. He realized that every object in this shrine held meaning, a sacred purpose preserved by the Adeptus Mechanicus. To disturb them carelessly would be to invite disaster, yet understanding their function could grant him the upper hand in the conflicts of this world. He crouched to examine one particularly intricate device, noting the delicate balance of circuitry and mechanical components, each part essential to the whole. A misstep could trigger alarms, or worse, unleash destructive energy he could not predict. Grogu stirred in his sling, sensing the strange psychic currents that filled the chamber. His eyes glowed faintly as he reached out, instinctively drawn to the energy that resonated with his own latent abilities. The Mandalorian adjusted Grogu, realizing that Grogu's presence might both complicate and aid their exploration. The child's affinity for the mysterious and arcane could provide insights, a way to interact with the shrine that he could not. Yet it also made them more noticeable, more of a target for the shrine's automated defenses or any hostile forces that might appear. The Mandalorian carefully traced a path towards a central dais, where a massive cogitator core thrummed with energy. The air around it seemed to vibrate with a strange resonance, and he could feel the pull of knowledge, power, and danger intertwined. He crouched behind a console, observing the patterns, noting the timing of servitor movements, and waiting for the optimal moment to approach. Every instinct was on high alert, every sense attuned to the rhythms of this alien sanctuary. The shrine was more than a refuge. It was a crucible, a place that demanded respect, understanding, and careful navigation to survive and glean its secrets. Grogu stirred restlessly in his sling, his small fingers curling around the edge of the Mandalorian's armor as though trying to anchor himself against an invisible force. The hive world around them throbbed with a strange energy, a psychic resonance that pulsed through the air like ripples on a storm-tossed ocean. The Mandalorian had felt odd disturbances before, strange phenomena in the outer reaches of the galaxy, but this was different. The sensation was immediate and intense, brushing against the edges of his consciousness in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Grogu's eyes glowed faintly green as he tilted his head toward the darkened streets ahead, and the Mandalorian could feel the raw power emanating from the child, almost as if he were a beacon calling to something unseen. The first sign came as a whisper carried on the wind, a guttural hiss that seemed almost alive, curling around the Mandalorian's armor and making his pulse quicken. He scanned the rooftops and crumbling spires, his visor struggling to pierce the heavy smoke and ash-laden air, and for the first time since arriving on this world, he felt a shiver of unease. Something was approaching, drawn by the same signal that Grogu unknowingly broadcasted. It wasn't orcs, nor any of the crude, predictable threats he had already encountered. This presence was deliberate, focused, intelligent, and malevolent. A shadow detached itself from the gloom, sliding along the edges of the ruined buildings with a fluid grace that defied the laws of physics as he knew them. Its form was humanoid, but twisted, eyes glowing like molten embers beneath a hooded cowl, and it carried a staff that crackled with dark energy. The Mandalorian's instinct screamed that this was no ordinary enemy. He crouched lower, keeping Grogu close, and let the child's own senses guide him. The little one's grip on his armor tightened, and the Mandalorian could feel a tug at the edge of his awareness, subtle but undeniable, as if the child were reaching out with a force he could neither name nor control. The air itself seemed to pulse in response to the sorcerer's approach, vibrating with an unnatural cadence that made the ground beneath them tremble. Shadows twisted in impossible angles, and distant echoes of laughter and whispers crawled along the walls like living things. The Mandalorian's hand hovered near his blaster, yet he hesitated. Conventional weaponry might harm flesh, metal, or even some forms of energy, but the sorcerer's power was something far beyond that. He had faced bounty targets who wielded deadly cunning and those who manipulated deadly weapons. But this was a predator who could reach into the mind, the soul, the very essence of being, bending it to his will. Grogu's glow intensified, small tendrils of energy curling outward, reacting to the dark aura surrounding the approaching figure. The Mandalorian's helmet scanners registered an anomaly, a fluctuation in the psychic field that painted the sorcerer as both highly potent and dangerously unstable. Every instinct he had as a hunter and protector screamed at him to move, to find cover, to prepare for the unseen traps and psychic assaults that could manifest at any moment. Yet there was another layer to it. The sorcerer was aware of them, calculating, patient, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The Mandalorian edged behind a toppled statue, his armor scraping softly against debris. He observed the sorcerer's movements, noting the deliberate rhythm, the way the staff emitted arcs of energy that twisted and danced along the stone and nettle surfaces. Each pulse seemed to respond to Grogu's latent power, as if the sorcerer were probing, testing the child's limits, attempting to establish dominance even from a distance. The little one's coos and whimpers were both innocent and alarming, the sounds reverberating in harmony with the strange energy of the Hive world. The Mandalorian knew that this interaction could attract attention far beyond the immediate threat, potentially drawing other, more lethal entities to their location. A sudden flare of light erupted from the sorcerer's staff, searing across the plaza and striking the debris near the Mandalorian. Sparks danced in the air, acrid smoke curling up from charred rubble. Reflexively, he activated his jetpack, lifting himself just high enough to avoid the blast while keeping Grogu shielded. The sorcerer's laugh was low and guttural, reverberating with a psychic resonance that penetrated armor and bone alike. The Mandalorian understood instinctively that conventional combat would not suffice. This was a battle of awareness, of perception, and of the ability to anticipate attacks that were as much mental as physical. Grogu extended a tiny hand, and the Mandalorian felt the child's power respond instinctively to the threat. Dark tendrils of energy recoiled from the glow, as if recognizing a force equal to their own. The sorcerer's eyes narrowed beneath the hood, calculating, and the Mandalorian could sense the shift in his posture, the way he subtly altered the pulse of his staff's energy to probe the limits of the child's defenses. Time seemed to stretch and compress in the charged air, each heartbeat magnified, every breath measured. The Mandalorian's mind raced, considering escape routes, potential allies, and the implications of engaging with a foe who existed on a level far beyond any hunter he had faced. The plaza seemed to shrink around them, the broken towers and twisted metal warping under the sorcerer's influence. Shadows stretched impossibly long, debris levitated, and the air itself shimmered with energy drawn from the child. The Mandalorian moved with precise, deliberate steps, always aware that one miscalculation could allow the sorcerer to strike decisively. Yet within the tension, a strange understanding emerged. This confrontation was not simply about survival, but about testing boundaries, gauging the true potential of Grogu's abilities, and navigating the intricate dance of predator and prey that existed between them.
The Mandalorian's steps were silent against the cracked and uneven pavement as he navigated the twisting corridors of the Hive city, each movement measured, precise, and deliberate. Smoke and ash hung thick in the air, curling in unpredictable patterns, partially obscuring the towering spires and jagged structures around him. He could feel the oppressive weight of the world pressing down, the faint hum of distant machinery vibrating through the ground, reminding him that this place was alive with war, decay, and menace. Even so, his focus was unbroken, trained on the immediate danger that had begun to manifest in ways he could not yet predict. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the dim light, and the faintest metallic scrape echoed like a gunshot in the endless canyon of ruined architecture. Then, through the haze, he saw them. Figures emerged from the gloom, clad in imposing, ceramite power armor that gleamed faintly in the polluted light. Their visors glowed with an intense, unyielding red, scanning the ruined streets as if marking everything within range. The Mandalorian instinctively ducked behind a collapsed wall, his hand tightening around his blaster. These were no ordinary foes. He had faced trained soldiers, assassins, and bounty hunters, but these armored titans radiated a presence that was almost palpable: discipline, precision, and an unquestionable authority that demanded compliance. Space Marines. Elite warriors of the Imperium, genetically enhanced and rigorously trained to enforce order and obliterate enemies. He had heard of them in whispered legends, tales that spoke of impossible resilience, unmatched skill, and unflinching loyalty. The first Space Marine stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily against the broken pavement, each impact reverberating through the Mandalorian's chestplate.
The others followed in formation, their armor clanking in measured rhythm, weapons held at the ready, scanning every shadow for potential threats. The Mandalorian felt a tense mixture of awe and apprehension. He had faced countless firefights, yet the idea of facing beings of this caliber, whose very existence was honed for war on a scale far beyond anything he had known, brought a new edge to his instincts. The children's safety weighed heavily on him. Grogu's small glowing eyes peered from the sling, sensing the danger, and the Mandalorian could feel the child's latent energy responding to the imposing aura of the Space Marines. He ducked lower, scanning for cover as the Marines began advancing. Their movements were deliberate, methodical, almost ceremonial in their execution, and each step seemed calculated to assess the threat without provoking unnecessary violence. The Mandalorian understood immediately that this encounter was as much about evaluation as it was confrontation. The Space Marines were not mindless brutes. They were strategists, warriors bred for both combat and judgment, and his every action would be scrutinized. He adjusted his posture, drawing on years of experience navigating hostile environments, and began calculating the most effective way to respond. One of the Marines raised a gauntleted hand, and a faint resonant hum emitted from a device on his armor. The air seemed to pulse with a warning, a psychic probe reaching out to gauge the Mandalorian's intent. His instincts screamed caution, and he took a measured step backward, signaling non-aggression while keeping a clear line of sight. The Marine's eyes, glowing crimson, seemed to pierce the shadows, searching for any sign of deception. Every twitch of muscle, every flicker of movement could be interpreted as threat or compliance, and the Mandalorian understood that he was walking a razor's edge between survival and annihilation. As the Marines advanced, the Mandalorian weighed his options. His blaster was reliable, his jetpack offered mobility, and his armor could withstand considerable punishment, yet none of these would guarantee success against beings of such formidable power. He needed to rely on agility, strategy, and the unpredictable advantage that Grogu provided. His child's latent energy could be a force multiplier, a wild card in a game defined by order and precision. But using that power recklessly could provoke lethal retaliation. He crouched behind a pile of debris, observing the formation and patterns of the approaching Space Marines, noting how they coordinated, how they communicated without words, and how their every action suggested readiness for threats beyond normal comprehension. One Marine stepped slightly forward, scanning a collapsed doorway where the Mandalorian had momentarily paused. The Mandalorian froze, aware that even the smallest movement could draw attention. His mind raced through contingencies, recalling every stealth tactic, every evasive maneuver he had mastered over years of bounty hunting. The Marine's head tilted, sensors flaring, as though reading the environment, assessing not just visible threats, but latent dangers as well. The Mandalorian's hand hovered near his blaster, a silent promise of readiness, yet he knew that open aggression could provoke a catastrophic response. The standoff stretched, each second magnified by tension and anticipation. Grogu's small coos echoed softly, an innocent sound amidst the potential storm, yet the Mandalorian could feel the child's latent energy subliminally shifting the energy in the space around them. It was enough to make even the disciplined warriors hesitate, just slightly, a microsecond of uncertainty that could be the difference between life and death. He realized that survival here required more than brute force. It required understanding the psychology of these warriors, predicting their responses, and maneuvering with patience and precision. As the Marines closed in, the Mandalorian began to back away slowly, keeping low and blending with the shadows. He mapped escape routes, noting ledges, debris piles, and collapsed corridors that could provide temporary cover or tactical advantage. The Space Marines adjusted their formation, subtly altering their advance, each movement calculated to cut off options, to channel him into a position where he could be contained or captured. The Mandalorian felt the pressure of the encounter, the weight of being observed and judged by warriors who had no tolerance for hesitation or error. Despite the tension, he remained calm, drawing on years of experience surviving against impossible odds. He studied the formation, looking for patterns, weaknesses, or predictable behaviors he could exploit without provoking immediate retaliation. Every step, every breath, and every glance was deliberate, a careful balance of evasion and assessment. The Mandalorian understood that in the presence of these elite warriors, raw skill alone would not suffice. He had to anticipate, adapt, and leverage every advantage at his disposal, including Grogu's mysterious power, the environment, and his own cunning.
The Mandalorian navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Hive city with the careful precision of a hunter moving through unfamiliar terrain. Smoke and ash hung heavily in the air, curling in unnatural patterns around the towering spires and crumbling industrial structures. Each step was deliberate, boots crunching against broken concrete and twisted metal, while his visor scanned constantly for threats. Despite the constant danger, he knew that survival required more than stealth and firepower. Weapons and resources were scarce, and the Hive world offered little in the way of conventional supplies. Every encounter, every decision could mean the difference between life and death. In the midst of the destruction, a flicker of movement caught his attention. Through the haze, he glimpsed a figure standing atop a half-collapsed balcony, gesturing with exaggerated motions that spoke of confidence and cunning. The figure was clad in rich, mismatched clothing, adorned with gadgets, trinkets, and technological relics that suggested wealth, influence, and a deep knowledge of the underworld. This was no ordinary survivor, no scavenger or petty thug. The Mandalorian's instincts told him that this was a rogue trader, someone who navigated the chaos of the Hive world with both intelligence and ruthlessness. Such individuals were known to barter for rare resources, technology, and information, assets that could prove invaluable in a world like this. Approaching cautiously, the Mandalorian kept his blaster within reach, aware that trust was a commodity more precious than credits on this planet. The rogue trader's eyes flicked to him as he neared, a faint smirk curving his lips beneath a hood that partially concealed his face. There was an unmistakable gleam of calculation in those eyes, assessing, weighing, and measuring. The Mandalorian knew that the interaction would require careful negotiation, a delicate dance between caution and opportunity. One wrong move, and the rogue trader could easily turn from ally to adversary, exploiting his vulnerabilities and the presence of Grogu for personal gain. The trader's voice was smooth, almost casual, yet it carried the subtle weight of authority and command. He gestured toward a nearby makeshift platform where crates of salvaged technology and weaponry had been stacked with deliberate care. Devices hummed with energy, some clearly ancient, others barely functional but filled with potential. The Mandalorian's eyes scanned quickly, identifying items that could enhance his arsenal, improve his defenses, or provide new ways to navigate the perilous Hive city. Each piece of equipment was a potential game-changer, yet each came with risks. Trusting the trader too quickly could lead to sabotage, traps, or hidden enemies watching from the shadows. Negotiations began with a series of gestures, coded signals, and careful words, each party measuring the other's intent. The Mandalorian knew he could not afford to reveal the full extent of Grogu's abilities, nor the true nature of the child's power. Such knowledge would make them a target, not only for the rogue trader, but for every faction within the Hive world eager to claim what they did not understand. Instead, he presented himself as a skilled mercenary, capable and resourceful, seeking temporary assistance and access to rare technology. The trader nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, as though calculating the exact value of the Mandalorian's proposition.
As the discussion progressed, the Mandalorian observed the subtle cues that betrayed the traitor's motivations. Every flick of a finger, every adjustment of a device, every glance toward the shadows hinted at hidden agendas. He realized that in a world defined by constant conflict and shifting alliances, trust was never absolute, and every agreement carried the potential for betrayal. The traitor offered a selection of weapons modifications, enhanced armor plating, and energy-based gadgets, each one meticulously engineered and brimming with latent potential. The Mandalorian evaluated each item carefully, weighing immediate utility against long-term consequences, aware that one poorly chosen enhancement could be fatal. During the exchange, Grogu reached out instinctively, his small hand brushing against a device that thrummed with psychic sensitivity. The Mandalorian reacted instantly, shielding the child while observing the rogue traitor's reaction. A flicker of recognition passed across the traitor's face, a hint that he understood more than he revealed, that he had encountered forces beyond the mundane and recognized the subtle power emanating from the child. The Mandalorian adjusted his approach, balancing caution with opportunity, aware that the traitor's knowledge could be both a resource and a threat. The environment around them was alive with danger. Crumbling buildings threatened to collapse, and distant explosions echoed across the cityscape, reminding them both that their negotiation occurred amid chaos. Every moment of distraction, every lapse in vigilance could be exploited by lurking orcs, space marines, or other unpredictable factions. The Mandalorian remained alert, constantly scanning, constantly calculating escape routes and tactical advantages while maintaining the appearance of cooperation. It was a delicate balance, a test of both patience and perception. Finally, the rogue traitor presented a device that caught the Mandalorian's attention, a compact energy module capable of amplifying blaster output and armor shielding simultaneously. It was sophisticated, dangerous, and invaluable. The Mandalorian studied it carefully, noting the potential risks of overloading, the energy feedback that could compromise Grogu, and the hidden triggers designed to test trust and skill. After a measured pause, he indicated his acceptance, signaling that the module would be integrated into his equipment. The traitor's smile widened, pleased by the successful negotiation, yet the Mandalorian remained cautious, aware that even a successful transaction could carry unseen consequences. As the Mandalorian prepared to depart, he observed the rogue traitor's posture, the subtle signals of readiness for either follow-up negotiation or opportunistic attack. He understood that in the Hive world, no deal was final, no alliance guaranteed. Each interaction was a test of instinct, strategy, and adaptability. He gathered the acquired equipment carefully, adjusting his armor to accommodate the new enhancements while keeping Grogu protected and secure. The child's small hands clutched his chest plate, unaware of the broader implications, but intuitively sensitive to the tension and potential threat that surrounded them. The Mandalorian's mind raced with calculations, evaluating how the new technology could alter their odds in future encounters, how it might provide tactical advantage against orcs, chaos forces, or other denizens of the Hive world. He weighed every decision, knowing that in this world, even a small misstep could trigger cascading consequences. The streets around them remained alive with danger, shadows and smoke concealing unknown threats. Yet the Mandalorian felt a sense of cautious confidence. He had secured resources that could tip the balance, and more importantly, he had navigated the treacherous waters of negotiation without exposing the full extent of their vulnerabilities or Grogu's extraordinary abilities.
The Mandalorian moved cautiously through the twisting, soot-choked corridors of the Hive city, each step careful to avoid drawing attention.
The oppressive architecture loomed overhead, a chaotic tangle of Gothic spires, rusted machinery, and hanging walkways, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air was thick with the smell of burning fuel, decaying metal, and the faint, acrid tang of ozone from distant energy discharges. Even amidst the chaos, there was an order here, an unyielding hierarchy that watched, judged, and punished without hesitation. He knew instinctively that in this world, survival was not merely a matter of firepower or skill. It demanded a deep understanding of who could be trusted, who observed from the shadows, and who carried authority enough to end a life with a single command. It was during a careful sweep of a crumbling plaza that the Mandalorian first sensed their presence, figures moving with deliberate precision, their long robes trailing over the uneven ground, their faces obscured beneath the deep hoods of the Imperium. The subtle glint of metal, the faint hum of concealed weaponry, and the barely perceptible aura of authority immediately set him on edge. Imperial Inquisitors, agents of judgment and fear, tasked with rooting out heresy, Xenos influence, and forbidden technology. Their eyes, though hidden, seemed to pierce through the smoke and shadows, scanning every corner, every alleyway, every soul that dared traverse their domain. The Mandalorian's instincts screamed caution. He had encountered danger before, and yet the threat posed by Inquisitors was unlike anything else. They were hunters of the mind and body, relentless in pursuit, unbound by morality or mercy. Their reach was near omnipotent, extending across planets and war zones, and their authority was absolute. One misstep, one artifact revealed, or one suspicion raised could mark him and Grogu for immediate extermination. The Mandalorian pressed himself against a wall, his armor scraping softly against corroded metal as he adjusted Grogu within his sling. The child's small eyes flickered with curiosity and latent awareness, sensing the tension before he fully understood it. The Inquisitors paused at the far end of the plaza, conversing in low, measured tones that carried authority despite the faint rustle of the ruined environment. Their movements were meticulous, almost ceremonial. Every gesture, every step conveyed dominance, a subtle assertion of control over a space that was otherwise lawless. The Mandalorian observed the intricate patterns of their patrol, noting the gaps between each movement, the subtle signals they exchanged, and the precise timing with which they coordinated their sweep. He understood that any attempt to pass unnoticed would require patience, calculation, and flawless execution. He inched forward, using the shadows and debris to mask his presence. Yet each step brought the faint risk of detection. The Inquisitors paused again, their heads tilting slightly, as if sensing an anomaly in the environment. The Mandalorian froze instinctively, blending into the darkness, allowing his sensors to feed him every detail of their scanning patterns. He could feel the oppressive weight of their scrutiny, a pressure that seemed to press against his very thoughts, probing, testing, seeking signs of deception or concealed technology. Grogu stirred gently in his sling, and the Mandalorian tightened his grip, aware that the child's presence, though subtle, could betray them to these relentless agents. Suddenly, one of the Inquisitors raised a gloved hand, the subtle hum of concealed energy weapons audible to the trained ear. The Mandalorian froze, every instinct screaming that exposure at this moment could be catastrophic. Yet the Inquisitor did not immediately advance. Instead, he tilted his head as though considering some unseen variable. The Mandalorian realized then that these hunters were not merely reactive, they were calculating, evaluating, and capable of predicting behavior with a frightening degree of accuracy. It was a game of mental chess, one in which even the slightest miscalculation could be lethal. He carefully adjusted his position, inching along the edge of a collapsed structure while keeping Grogu shielded from view. The child's eyes glowed faintly in response to the psychic tension in the air, and the Mandalorian sensed that his presence alone might draw further attention if not handled with extreme caution. Every heartbeat was amplified, every breath measured, and every micro-movement weighed for potential consequence. The Inquisitors moved again, their long robes brushing against rubble as they passed by, their attention focused elsewhere, but their presence still heavy, commanding, impossible to ignore. The Mandalorian's mind raced with strategies. He knew he could not confront them directly. The risk was far too great. Instead, he relied on misdirection, timing, and the environment itself, weaving through corridors, ducking beneath fallen girders, and using the shifting shadows to mask their passage. Every corner, every rusted pipe, every broken wall became a tool in their survival, a means to navigate a world where a single detection could invite interrogation, torture, or worse. He noted exits, vantage points, and potential choke points, cataloging them silently as options for both evasion and, if necessary, countermeasures. Grogu reached out instinctively, his small hand brushing against the Mandalorian's chest plate. The Mandalorian felt the subtle surge of the child's latent abilities, a psychic presence that could influence the environment in ways that were not immediately visible. The Inquisitors would sense it if it flared too strongly, yet it could also serve as a tool if manipulated carefully, a way to obscure their movement or disrupt the agent's perception. He adjusted the child within his sling, maintaining both protection and subtle control over the unseen forces at play. A distant rumble echoed through the ruined city, and the Mandalorian knew that their window of stealth was shrinking. The Inquisitors were relentless, unyielding, and their patience was matched only by their thoroughness. Any hesitation could allow them to pinpoint his location, and any display of unfamiliar technology or force, no matter how minor, could provoke immediate action. He weighed each decision with meticulous care, balancing the need for survival against the risk of attracting attention, knowing that their continued evasion depended on a careful, deliberate dance of observation, timing, and restraint. As the Inquisitors shifted position, the Mandalorian seized the moment to move deeper into the shadowed alleyways, every step a blend of urgency and calculation. He used the environment to shield Grogu, to obscure his silhouette, and to create confusion in the perception of those relentless hunters. Every movement was a statement. He was present, aware, and capable, yet elusive, unpredictable, and adaptable. The air remained thick with tension, the oppressive presence of the Inquisitors a constant reminder that they were being judged at every moment, that the slightest misstep could shatter their fragile security, and that the rules of this world were dictated by forces far beyond simple morality or negotiation.
The Mandalorian crouched low behind a fractured wall, his visor scanning the horizon as the distant rumble grew louder, shaking the ground beneath his boots. The Hive city had already been a landscape of chaos and ruin, but now the air vibrated with a new, terrifying rhythm. Entire sections of the industrial skyline trembled as the ground itself seemed to pulse and breathe with life. He could feel it in his chest, a deep gnawing unease, the primal recognition of a predator's presence unlike anything he had faced before. The Tyranid swarms had arrived. He had heard rumors of their devastating campaigns, the whispers of planets stripped bare and civilizations extinguished in mere hours, but nothing in his experience could prepare him for the visceral reality. From the edges of the ruined streets, shadows moved with coordinated precision.
grotesque and alien forms twisting across the debris-littered ground. Their chittering and hissing carried an unsettling intelligence, a predatory awareness that seemed to sense both him and Grogu simultaneously. The Mandalorian instinctively adjusted his stance, gripping his blaster and activating his jetpack for swift maneuverability. He was no stranger to ambushes, but the Tyranids operated on a scale and in a manner that defied conventional strategy. They were not mindless, not chaotic in the human sense. They were perfect predators, driven by instinctive hive intelligence, each movement synchronized with thousands of others across the battlefield. He considered their options carefully. The Mandalorian knew direct confrontation would be suicidal. Even a small detachment of Tyranids could overwhelm him in seconds. Yet retreat required careful navigation through the crumbling Hive streets, where collapsed walkways and unstable scaffolding could betray his position at any moment. Grogu stirred in his sling, sensing the alien menace, and the Mandalorian felt the small surge of latent power that always accompanied the child's heightened awareness. It was subtle but undeniable, a psychic echo that, if properly channeled, could provide a critical advantage, or, if uncontrolled, a catastrophic risk. The first wave of Tyranids surged from the shadows, their multi-limbed forms crashing over debris with terrifying speed. The Mandalorian fired his blaster in controlled bursts, each shot aimed to disrupt rather than annihilate, forcing the nearest forms to hesitate and buy him precious seconds to maneuver. The air was thick with the smell of alien musk, acidic saliva, and the faint metallic tang of scorched flesh. Explosions of debris accompanied the muzzle flashes, creating a chaotic dance of light and shadow as he moved, each moment a balance of offense and evasion. Above him, the jagged spires of the Hive city became vantage points for scouting Tyranids, their flying forms swooping with predatory grace, scanning for movement. The Mandalorian activated his jetpack, leaping onto a higher ledge to gain a clearer view, simultaneously keeping Grogu protected within the sling. From this height, he could see the scale of the attack, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Tyranids converging with single-minded purpose, driven by the instinctive call of the Hive. He recognized that their movements were not chaotic, but coordinated, part of a greater, horrifying intelligence that adapted with each maneuver, countering conventional tactics with relentless efficiency. He fired selectively, choosing targets that threatened to flank or cut off escape routes, relying on precision and mobility rather than brute force. The Tyranids responded with astonishing speed, their bodies twisting and contorting in impossible angles, swarming over rubble and leaping from exposed scaffolds. The ground trembled with the impact of their collective weight, each landing sending vibrations through his armor, threatening to unbalance him. He felt the stakes acutely. One miscalculated step could lead to a cascade of attacks from the swarm, overwhelming him entirely. Grogu's small hand pressed against the Mandalorian's chest plate, and the psychic resonance intensified. The Mandalorian understood instinctively that Grogu's powers could disrupt the Tyranid's coordination, but doing so recklessly could draw attention from even more dangerous elements hidden within the swarm. He considered subtle applications of Grogu's abilities, diverting a portion of the creatures, creating temporary confusion in their ranks, or sensing optimal escape paths. Each decision required split-second timing, balancing the child's safety against the tactical advantage that his intervention could provide. The swarm pressed closer, forcing him into the narrow confines of a collapsed plaza. He ducked beneath a fallen beam, scanning the alien forms as they moved with predatory synchronization. The Tyranid's chittering became almost deafening, a rising crescendo that filled the air, vibrating through metal, stone, and the very ground beneath him. Despite the chaos, he maintained a tactical assessment of the battlefield, noting choke points, potential escape routes, and environmental hazards that could be leveraged against the swarm. Acidic spittle landed near him, sizzling against metal, a stark reminder that even minor exposure carried lethal risk. He activated a thermal charge, hurling it into the advancing mass, producing a violent explosion that disrupted a segment of the swarm and sent alien limbs thrashing into rubble. The Mandalorian used the momentary confusion to navigate a precarious path towards a partially intact overpass, the child securely tightly against him. Every movement was calculated, a delicate balance of speed, precision, and foresight, aware that any hesitation could allow the Tyranids to adjust instantly and trap them. The swarm's adaptability was unnerving. Every tactic that worked against one group seemed to be anticipated by the next wave, forcing continuous recalibration. From above, a massive hive tyrant landed near the Mandalorian's previous position, its eyes gleaming with a dark, unyielding intelligence. The creature exuded dominance, and the Mandalorian recognized the difference between a generic swarmling and the command presence of a synapse creature directing the smaller Tyranids. He shifted his strategy, focusing on movement and evasion, knowing that confronting such a foe directly would be suicidal. The Tyranid's attention seemed drawn to the subtle psychic aura surrounding Grogu, amplifying the threat to them both. The Mandalorian tightened his grip on the child, weighing every movement, every choice, as the swarm's coordination tightened around them like a living net. Each step brought new challenges, unstable structures threatening collapse, acid pools from previous attacks, and smaller Tyranid broods attempting to flank or isolate them. The Mandalorian relied on every ounce of skill, every tool at his disposal, and the keen instincts that had kept him alive across countless star systems. He constantly recalibrated his path, using debris as cover, exploiting the alien swarm's momentum, and balancing the need for speed against the risk of exposure. Grogu's small coups and glimmers of energy guided him subtly, providing insight into the psychic currents around them and hinting at the optimal path through the chaos. The Hive City itself became an active participant in the battle. Collapsing scaffolding, sparking conduits, and unstable machinery added unpredictable hazards, both threatening and offering opportunities. The Mandalorian used this environment strategically, forcing segments of the swarm into confined spaces where their numbers became a liability, and leveraging debris to block or slow their advance. The Tyranids adapted, but the Mandalorian adapted faster, calculating trajectories, timing, and the interplay of environmental forces with precision honed from years of survival on hostile worlds.
The Mandalorian moved cautiously through the shattered streets of the Hive City, the thick, acidic haze clinging to his armor and obscuring his vision. The air was alive with chaos, carrying distant echoes of explosions, the metallic screech of collapsing infrastructure, and the guttural shouts of those who had already fallen victim to the constant conflict that raged across the planet. Smoke curled in twisting plumes from damaged factories and destroyed vehicles, partially obscuring the jagged spires that rose like blackened teeth against the blood-red sky. Every step he took was deliberate, calculated, a measured balance between speed and stealth, knowing that one misstep could draw attention from foes far more lethal than mere scavengers. Suddenly, a low, menacing growl echoed from the shadows, vibrating through the ground and making the Mandalorian instinctively tighten his grip on his blaster. His visor's sensors scanned the area, revealing movement in the dim light, hulking, heavily armored forms with predatory optics glinting under the haze. Predators. The alien hunters had entered the Hive City, drawn by the scent of potential prey and the chaos that permeated every corner. Their presence was unmistakable, radiating lethal precision and unmatched stealth, the combination of which had made them feared across countless worlds. The Mandalorian's instincts screamed that these creatures were not only dangerous, but intelligent hunters who thrived in environments designed to trap and confuse others. He shifted behind a pile of rubble,
keeping low while analyzing the movement patterns of the predators. The creatures moved with uncanny grace, muscles rippling beneath thick, camouflaged armor, weapons glinting in their hands with deadly promise. Their optics scanned in calculated sweeps, sweeping over every surface, every shadow, seeking anomalies, vibrations, and traces of life. The Mandalorian knew instinctively that detection would be swift and lethal. His years of hunting and survival gave him confidence, yet even he felt a flicker of caution, aware that the Hive city itself was now a secondary predator, its unstable structures and labyrinthine corridors compounding the danger. Grogu stirred in his sling, his small fingers curling instinctively around the Mandalorian's chest plate as though responding to the predator's presence. The Mandalorian felt the faint psychic aura radiating from the child, subtle but perceptible, and he understood that Grogu's latent powers could serve as a warning beacon, or an advantage if carefully controlled. Every decision had to account for the child's safety, the unpredictable reactions of the predators, and the constantly shifting environment. He scanned potential escape routes, noting unstable scaffolds, partially collapsed bridges, and sections of the city that could offer temporary cover or tactical advantage if navigated with precision. The first predator stepped into a shaft of flickering light, its mandibles clicking softly, weapons raised and scanning. The Mandalorian froze, blending into the shadows, and held his breath as the creature moved with deliberate caution. Its gaze swept across the debris-strewn streets, analyzing and predicting patterns with a focus honed through countless hunts. He realized that these hunters were not reckless, they were calculating, patient, and merciless. Engaging them directly would be suicidal, yet retreat required careful timing and strategic use of the environment to avoid being cornered. He activated his jetpack briefly, lifting to a higher ledge while maintaining a clear line of sight to Grogu, who remained calm but perceptive, his glowing eyes flicking toward the predators with innate awareness. The predator's optics adjusted, tracking the subtle movement, yet the Mandalorian used the shifting shadows and the smoke from distant fires to obscure his ascent. Each step was measured, each maneuver was deliberate. He understood that survival depended not only on speed or firepower, but on anticipation, predicting the hunter's next moves and adapting instantly to shifting threats. A sudden screech tore through the air, alerting others in the vicinity, and the predators split into coordinated units, their movements synchronized with uncanny precision. One advanced across the debris with stealthy grace, another flanking from a collapsed overpass, and yet another scanning from a higher vantage point. The Mandalorian assessed the threat rapidly, identifying the best path for evasion while keeping Grogu shielded. He hurled a small thermal charge to create a brief distraction, the explosion sending sparks and smoke into the air, drawing the attention of one predator momentarily while allowing him to maneuver past a choke point. The city itself seemed to conspire in the encounter. Sections of metal and concrete groaned under stress, scattering debris with each step. Sparks erupted from damaged conduits, providing momentary illumination and revealing predator positions. The Mandalorian used the chaos to his advantage, slipping through shadows, ducking behind walls, and moving with the precision of a hunter who had long adapted to hostile environments. Yet the predator's senses were extraordinary. Their tracking was relentless, their patience unwavering. Each misstep risked a confrontation that would leave no margin for error. Grogu's presence became increasingly significant. His psychic signals subtly influenced the environment, causing small disturbances in the predator's coordination. Shadows shifted. Subtle energy ripples disoriented them just enough to create micro-openings, allowing the Mandalorian to navigate corridors that would otherwise have been sealed. Every instinct, every move had to account for this delicate balance between exploiting Grogu's abilities and ensuring the child remained undetected and unharmed.
The Mandalorian felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever before, knowing that the predators would adapt rapidly if they sensed even the faintest anomaly. The predators began to converge, a wave of lethal precision moving toward his position. The Mandalorian calculated his next moves carefully, identifying the structural weaknesses of the surrounding environment. He knew that the hunters could not manipulate the unstable infrastructure as he could, giving him an advantage if he moved with foresight. He leapt to a precarious ledge, using a tangle of pipes and girders to obscure his silhouette, his blaster ready to fire only if necessary. The creatures paused, analyzing, listening, sensing, their uncanny alien instincts pushing them to adapt, yet the Mandalorian had anticipated their approach, turning their precision against them. Time stretched as he navigated a narrow path between broken machinery and collapsed walls. Each footfall, each calculated movement brought him closer to a temporary safe zone deeper within the hive. Grogu's small hand pressed instinctively against his chest plate as a subtle reminder of the stakes. The predators were relentless, but so was the Mandalorian's resolve. His experience, combined with careful observation, tactical foresight, and Grogu's latent abilities, allowed him to turn the treacherous environment into a weapon, forcing the hunters into positions where their strength and precision became liabilities rather than advantages.
The Mandalorian moved with calculated precision through the desolate expanse of the Hive city, the ruins stretching endlessly around him like the skeleton of a world long consumed by war. Dust and ash choked the narrow alleys, swirling with every footstep, and the faint hum of distant machinery vibrated through the ground, a constant reminder that this place was alive in its own destructive way. His visor swept the environment, picking out threats hidden in shadows and behind twisted metal girders. Every instinct screamed vigilance, for he was no longer simply a hunter or a mercenary. Here, in the heart of the Imperium, he was a potential target of forces whose power and ruthlessness dwarfed anything he had encountered. The first sign of the threat was subtle, a distortion in the air, a faint shimmer against the thick, smoke-laden atmosphere. He paused, jetpack ready but inactive, and scanned the horizon. The telltale glint of reflected light caught his attention first. Then the unmistakable form of a Terminator unit, a towering humanoid machine encased in reinforced titanium alloy, its red optics scanning methodically across the ruined landscape. The Mandalorian instinctively crouched, assessing the situation. This was not a conventional combatant. The T-800 was a killing machine, programmed with relentless efficiency, adaptive tactics, and unflinching resolve. Unlike any enemy he had faced, this one did not falter, hesitate, or negotiate. It calculated, pursued, and terminated its objectives without deviation. Grogu stirred in his sling, sensing the presence of the machine in a way that went beyond mere perception. The child's latent abilities gave off subtle psychic signals, alerting the Mandalorian to threats that might otherwise remain hidden. He adjusted his movements, keeping Grogu close and shielded, and weighed his options. Confrontation was risky. The Terminator's strength, speed, and relentless persistence made direct engagement almost suicidal. Retreat was equally fraught, for the machine would track, calculate, and anticipate every escape route. Every decision required precision, foresight, and the ability to exploit the environment to the fullest. The ground trembled as the Terminator advanced, its movements deceptively smooth for a machine of its size and mass. Its optics locked onto his position, sweeping with uncanny precision, and he could almost feel its calculations, cold and unyielding, as it determined his likely escape path. The Mandalorian ducked behind a fallen wall, scanning for structural weaknesses, elevated platforms, or unstable debris that could serve as both cover and weapon. He activated a thermal detonator, tossing it toward the advancing machine to create a temporary distraction.
The explosion rocked the area, sending sparks and shards of metal flying, yet the Terminator's response was immediate and analytical. It paused only briefly before continuing, adjusting its trajectory with surgical accuracy. He moved with agility and patience, using the ruins as both shield and tool. Collapsed scaffolds and broken walkways provided vantage points. Narrow choke points slowed pursuit, and unstable machinery could be used to disrupt the machine's balance temporarily. Every movement was calculated, every sound measured. The Mandalorian knew that the Terminator adapted, learned, and pursued with relentless efficiency. It did not tire, did not hesitate, and did not underestimate its prey. His challenge was not simply to survive, but to outthink a being whose programming allowed for the most ruthless and effective forms of prediction. Grogu's presence became a critical factor. The child's subtle psychic emissions interacted with the environment, producing small, almost imperceptible disruptions that interfered with the Terminator's sensors. Dust shifted, machinery vibrated in unexpected patterns, and shadows seemed to move differently under the child's influence. The Mandalorian relied on these disruptions, timing his movements to coincide with the brief intervals when the machine's calculations were momentarily offset. Every step forward required careful coordination, balancing speed, stealth, and Grogu's psychic assistance to create openings where none naturally existed. The Terminator's red optics flared as it scanned a section of collapsed plaza, analyzing debris and structural weak points, adapting its approach to anticipate his next movement. The Mandalorian took advantage, leaping onto a precarious ledge and firing selective bursts from his blaster to destabilize the surrounding rubble. The machine responded with measured efficiency, stepping carefully yet deliberately over the detritus, recalculating angles of attack and pursuit. Its presence was a constant, unrelenting pressure, and the Mandalorian knew that mistakes would be fatal. Every movement, every decision required flawless execution under stress that pushed him to the limits of skill and endurance. He wove through the ruined streets, using environmental hazards to slow the Terminator. Sparks from damaged conduits erupted in arcs across his path, and he timed his movements to use these distractions as cover. Sections of unstable buildings and half-collapsed walkways provided temporary refuge, allowing him to regroup, reposition Grogu, and analyze the machine's behavioral patterns. Each encounter was a test of perception and strategy, a battle of wits as much as survival. The Mandalorian noted the way the Terminator's attention focused, predicting its adjustments and using them to manipulate its movements into positions advantageous to him. As he moved deeper into the city, the Mandalorian recognized that he could not simply flee indefinitely. He needed to leverage knowledge of the environment, the architecture, and Grogu's abilities to create situations where the Terminator's advantages were neutralized or diminished. Narrow corridors, unstable scaffolds, and broken machinery could be exploited to channel the machine into vulnerable positions. The Mandalorian calculated every step, anticipating the Terminator's adaptive strategies and preparing contingencies in case its programming outpaced his initial plans. He paused atop a partially collapsed overpass, scanning the streets below. The Terminator was moving with relentless precision, yet the Mandalorian had manipulated the environment to his favor, creating a temporary tactical advantage. Grogu stirred, sensing the tension and subtly influencing the surrounding area, causing minor structural disturbances that could be used strategically. The Mandalorian's focus was absolute, combining instinct, experience, and calculated use of both the environment and Grogu's abilities to maintain even a chance of evading the unyielding T-800 that stalked him through the Hive city.
The Mandalorian advanced cautiously through the ruined corridors of the Hive city, his boots crunching softly against layers of debris, ash, and scorched metal. The sky above burned with the glow of distant fires, casting long, twisted shadows across the jagged architecture of the Imperium's industrial nightmare. Each spire and collapsed structure loomed like the skeletal remains of a long-dead titan, a constant reminder that this world had been forged in violence and chaos. The air was thick with smoke, acrid fumes, and the low hum of distant machinery vibrating through the ground beneath him. Grogu stirred in his sling, sensing the tension in the atmosphere, his small fingers curling instinctively around the Mandalorian's armor. The first signs of the threat came in the low rumble of engines and the metallic scrape of armored treads against rubble. A squad of Chaos Space Marines emerged from the shadows, their spiked ceramite armor gleaming under the firelight, eyes glowing with an unholy crimson intensity. Each step they took reverberated through the corridors, a drumbeat of inevitability that made even seasoned warriors pause. The Mandalorian froze, analyzing their formation and behavior. These were not merely soldiers, they were instruments of devastation, bred for brutality and augmented with centuries of combat experience and forbidden enhancements. The air itself seemed to warp around them, a palpable aura of malevolence that tugged at the edges of the Mandalorian's consciousness. He moved behind a pile of rubble, pressing Grogu close to his chest and scanning for escape routes. The Chaos Marines were spreading outward, their movements methodical yet unpredictable, their weapons humming with unholy energy. Every instinct screamed caution. The Mandalorian had survived countless firefights, evaded powerful warlords, and faced merciless assassins, but these warriors represented a different scale of threat. Their power was amplified by centuries of dark rites, mutation, and unrestrained cruelty. Conventional tactics could only carry him so far. Here, improvisation and acute awareness would be the keys to survival. Grogu's psychic presence stirred faintly, reacting to the Chaos Marine's corrupt aura. The Mandalorian felt the subtle pressure, a tug at the edges of his own perception, as if the child were sensing a dimension of danger he could not yet define. It was both a warning and an opportunity. Every movement, every decision had to consider Grogu's reactions. His abilities were unpredictable, yet potentially invaluable in creating openings, disrupting enemy coordination, or sensing hazards that conventional sensors could not detect. The Mandalorian adjusted his tactics, blending stealth, environmental awareness, and selective use of the child's psychic presence to maintain the upper hand, or at least avoid immediate detection. The first Chaos Marine stepped forward, its armored boots grinding against shattered concrete. Its power sword glowed faintly, a blade imbued with malevolent energy capable of cutting through reinforced ceramite. The Mandalorian remained still, letting the shadows conceal him as he studied the enemy. He recognized the subtle cues, the tilt of the head, the rhythm of the stride, the scanning patterns of the optics. This was a predator that relied on instinct, experience, and dark enhancements. A misstep, however small, could draw immediate, lethal attention. He weighed his options, calculating whether evasion, diversion, or selective engagement would yield the best chance of survival. He moved silently through the rubble-strewn streets, using debris as cover and misdirection. A toppled scaffold provided a momentary shield from the Chaos Marine's line of sight, while twisted metal pipes created narrow passages that limited the enemy's movement. He knew he could not fight these warriors head-on. Even with his armor, weapons, and experience, they were simply too powerful, too resilient, and too unpredictable. Instead, he relied on positioning, the environment, and Grogu's latent abilities to outmaneuver and mislead them. A distant roar echoed across the Hive city, drawing the attention of one of the Chaos Marines. It lifted its helmeted head, scanning for the source, and the Mandalorian seized the opportunity. He rolled across debris, using the shadows and smoke to obscure his path, and activated a small thermal charge, sending sparks and rubble flying to create a temporary distraction. The Marine snarled, raising its power weapon, but the Mandalorian had already moved to a higher ledge, keeping Grogu protected while maintaining a clear vantage point. The environment itself became a tool. Collapsing walkways, exposed power conduits, and unstable machinery created hazards that could be manipulated to hinder the Chaos Marines. The Mandalorian timed his movements with precision, forcing the enemy to navigate treacherous terrain while maintaining his own path of escape. Sparks erupted from damaged conduits as he passed, briefly illuminating his pursuers and revealing gaps in their formation. Every movement, every decision was a delicate balance of speed, stealth, and psychological pressure. Grogu cooed softly, his psychic influence subtly amplifying the chaotic energy around them. The Mandalorian felt the shift immediately. The Chaos Marines' coordination faltered ever so slightly, their focus disrupted just enough to allow the Mandalorian to maneuver through a partially collapsed corridor. He adjusted his pace, ensuring the child remained calm and protected, while exploiting every opening the environment and the child's abilities provided. The aura of malevolence surrounding the Chaos Marines was oppressive, but their slight disorientation allowed the Mandalorian to maintain momentum and control of the encounter. As he navigated deeper into the Hive city, the Mandalorian's path became a complex weave of cover, elevation, and calculated risk. Narrow alleys forced the enemy to approach singly or in small groups, limiting their advantage in brute force. Overhead walkways offered vantage points for observation, while unstable scaffolds and debris could be manipulated to create temporary barriers or hazards. Every step was deliberate, measured against the capabilities of his pursuers and the unpredictable nature of the city itself. The Mandalorian understood that this confrontation was not simply about survival. It was a test of adaptability, strategy, and the ability to leverage every available resource. Grogu's psychic presence, the environment, and the Mandalorian's own instincts were intertwined in a dynamic balance. Each minor advantage had to be preserved, each risk carefully calculated. The Chaos Marines adapted quickly, yet the Mandalorian remained ahead by anticipating their movements, using the city's chaos to disrupt their formation and creating opportunities to move undetected or temporarily evade capture. Every corner brought new tension. Shadows shifted unpredictably, smoke obscured vision, and distant sounds hinted at additional threats lurking beyond immediate sight. The Mandalorian's focus was absolute, a blend of instinct, experience, and analytical precision. Grogu's subtle reactions provided guidance, signaling hidden dangers or opportunities, and the Mandalorian adjusted continuously, navigating the ruined Hive city with the calculated patience of a seasoned hunter, confronting foes far beyond ordinary reckoning.